One of our top stories last few days, probably into the future as well. Deadlock down south as Obama and the GOP unable to stop this whole government shutdown from going into day 3. For some insight on the developments, or the lack of them, we're joined live by Kyle Olson. He's a political commentator and a publisher of EAGNEWS, and he joins us from Muskegon, Michigan. Not often, Kyle, I get to say that name.
You know where that is?
To be fair, no, I don't. Where is it?
It's right along Lake Michigan, on the western side of the state.
Okay, so what are the sentiments there in Muskegon, Michigan, as far as the shutdown happening?
Well, it's amazing because, you know, the street lights are still on, the stoplights are still working, the police, there was an accident outside our office yesterday, police arrived. From our perspective, it's business as usual. But what's interesting is to see how dysfunctional Washington is, and I think the politicians in Washington are seeing that business is going on, lives are going on as usual.
Yeah, I was never one to fret over the shutdown per se. I'm a little bit more concerned about the debt ceiling. How about you, Kyle?
Yeah, for sure. And what we're seeing, though, is that they're not really taking that seriously. President Obama is not willing to negotiate. The Republicans are saying we need to deal with Obamacare, which I'm sure you've been talking about is a total disaster, is a total failure. And yet they're not willing to deal with those things. And instead, what we're seeing are these sorts of petty games going on with, you know, blocking veterans from memorials. I read this morning that the beaches in Normandy are actually closed. The cemeteries are closed. The feds are trying to close Mount Vernon, where George Washington lived. All sorts of, you know, petty games that aren't actually dealing with the real problem.
But it's all optics. And your point is well made in Obamacare. Obamacare was still put in place on the 1st. It's still out there. It's trying to function, and nobody's funding it.
Right. And so, and you're right. They are still trying to make that work, but everything else they're not trying to make work. And, you know, our organization looks at education and spending and, you know, how schools are performing and those sorts of things. And if you go to the Federal Department of Education website, it doesn't work because they shut it down because of this shutdown. And so those sorts of things you can't get access to, but they're still trying to make Obamacare work. And it's a total failure. You know, people can't get on the website. They can't enroll. It's a disaster. But that's the sort of thing that happens when government tries to dictate, tries to control what is going on in American society.
No question about that. At the same time, though, critics of the Republicans, if you will, say that this thing hasn't even been put to a vote in Congress, and that it's a small group that is driving the agenda for the Republicans. What are your thoughts there, Kyle?
Well, that's the way it works. They have to have a majority to get things done, and they don't have a majority. And so, you know, what they should be doing is they should be looking at the fact that Obamacare is not working. The system is a failure. And that's the ironic thing to me is people, they can't even enroll. Just imagine what the care is going to be like if they can't even enroll. And so, you know, what they need to do is figure out how to either reform that or completely ditch it so it can work. But they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to talk to the Ted Cruz's of the Republicans. They're not willing to deal with the debt and the deficit and those sorts of things. And so we're at this stalemate.
When you say they, is it the Senate or is it the President?
I think it's both. And I think also it's progressive Republicans that they just want this all to go away and they just want everybody to be happy. But what they're not dealing with is that we have unsustainable spending. We have unsustainable debt and deficit. Those are the sorts of things that need to be dealt with. And they appear not to be serious in dealing with those problems.
Yeah, except that the last time something like this happened, Kyle, sequestration was the end result, if you will. And that seemed to kind of work.
Well, and see, what was ironic to me about that was that sequestration was simply a slowing in the rate of government growth. And so spending continued, but not at the rate that the politicians wanted. And you're right. You know, what we heard when sequestration was coming down was that, you know, schools were going to close and teachers were going to be laid off and it was going to be pandemonium in the streets. But lo and behold, after that happened, nobody really noticed it. And I think that's what's happening with the shutdown as well, is people aren't really noticing it, much to the chagrin of President Obama and the politicians in Washington.
Yeah. Good for news organizations, though, Kyle. Kyle, I'm glad to hear the lights are still on in Muskegon, Michigan.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us.
And they will continue to be on.
Yeah, exactly. Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Kyle Olson, political commentator and publisher of EAG News.